question that, a topic that is top of mind for me as I work from home with 2 kids doing schooling from home and a wife that's working from home, and kids may pop through the door behind me at any moment. You never know. So it's an interesting time, and it's a time where I think everybody has to be very aware of their mental health, and that's a big concern. So today we are going to focus on that. But before we jump in, I have a few updates from the chamber that Valerie Rochon, our president, asked me to share. One, just to know a couple of housekeeping things. Everyone will be muted throughout the session. If you have a question you'd like to ask one of our guests or any of us, you can use the chat feature, and that will go to me, and we will get those questions. Certainly at the end, we'll get to plenty of time for questions. If for some reason we haven't had this issue, and I think Zoom's kind of figured it out a little bit, but if we do have any Zoom bombing issues, we'll just go ahead and close the meeting, because that's not how we want to spend our Friday afternoon. This is being recorded, and we will post this on our website. We usually get them up there on Monday, so you can go back if you missed one. You can go back and look at that. We'll get this one up there on Monday, so you can share it with anyone that maybe couldn't be here today. A couple updates from Valerie. It's a page and a half here, so I'm going to do my best to shrink it down because there's a lot of stuff here. But some things that the chamber is working on. We're working with the Gopher Legislative Committee, and that's the committee that is working to get New Hampshire reopened and distribute the $1.25 billion grant that the state received. So we're working with them to share the concerns of the business community so that they know how to best invest that money. Making recommendations for provisions for hospitals and healthcare, affordable childcare, business relief funding, farmers and fishers, the New Hampshire Food Bank, higher education, all those industry segments. We're working to communicate their needs and concerns. You can find adopted guidelines on reopening at New Hampshire, nheconomy.com/COVID-19, and you just click on the essential businesses reopening, and the governor's orders from May 1st are there for you to take a look at. We, of course, are updating our website. If you go to our portsmouthcollaborative.org website, we have a list of retailers that are reopening. We have a number of retailers that, since they were allowed to open earlier this week, have made that decision. And we're going to be continuing to update that list. And I believe it's next week, restaurants have the ability to reopen, and we will be putting a list together of those restaurants that are reopening for outside in-person dining. I know several of our favorites are going to be jumping on that train. So working very closely with the restaurant community to make sure that happens in a smooth and safe way. Of course, with the fabulous city health department and health officials. May is National Mental Health Awareness Month, conveniently, and that's sort of what led to our topic today. So today we're pleased to welcome 2 of our local mental health professionals. We have Rebekah Throop, the Vice President of Community Relations at Seacoast Mental Health Center, and Christine Burke, the Wellness Coordinator for Portsmouth Public Schools. We've invited these professionals because we recognize that the stress and anxiety of the extended COVID-19 pandemic is impacting our physical and mental health, our work, our families, and our relationships. We are looking forward to their insight on how employers can manage their own stressors while assisting staff at home, and particularly with our children. Remember that we will have questions at the end. You can send those through on the chat function to me, and we will hand those out to our guests. So with all that being said, before one last small housekeeping thing, I'd like to thank City Councilors Cliff Lazenby and Petra Huda for joining us today. Good to see you, Cliff. Thanks for the wave. And I like your backdrop. Beautiful photo. We are going to jump into it. So we have with us Christine Burke. Christine has a background, and her background is a combination of both education and public health. Previous to coming to Portsmouth, she served as the director of the Center of Health and Wellness at Keene State College for 15 years. We also are going to welcome Rebekah Throop. Rebekah has been working in marketing and branding strategy in the wellness industry for over 20 years. She is currently the Vice President of Community Relations at Seacoast Mental Health Center, and also volunteers in a peer support capacity with people struggling with substance use disorders. So one at a time, we're going to allow these Rebekah and Christine to introduce themselves, share a little bit about what they do, and then we're going to jump into a bit of facilitated dialogue about that. So with that being said, we're going to start with Rebekah. And so tell us about Seacoast Mental Health, Rebekah, and what you do there.
Great. Well, thanks, Ben. We really appreciate you having me and having Seacoast represented here. Seacoast Mental Health Center is one of the 10 community mental health centers in the state of New Hampshire. We're part of what we call SEBA, which is the New Hampshire Community Behavioral Health Association. We have been in existence since the 1950s in the location where we are. And basically, Seacoast, we have offices in Portsmouth and Exeter, and we serve what we look at as the holistic mental health and life supports for people in 24 towns in the eastern half of Rockingham County. We provide traditional therapy and psychiatry as you would think of it, but we do everything from looking at the holistic strategies that a family needs essentially to be stabilized. So we deal with food insecurity, we help people get on social services, we deal with fitness if that's an issue that people need to be able to stabilize their physical and mental well-being. We work with children in the school districts. We work very closely with Christine and her team in Portsmouth and with the other 23 school districts so that we can meet kids where they are. We are in a number of Appledore and core physician offices and our emergency services staff. We operate 24/7 out of our offices, but we also staff the behavioral health needs in the Exeter Emergency Department over in Exeter Hospital. So my role at the center is essentially marketing and awareness and the fundraising functions that help support and build out the programmatic services that we can offer. Right now, with everything that's going on, especially and the aftermath of the pandemic hitting, we are seeing an incredible need in addition for services. And so this is really a function that we're trying to dig into and be able to make sure that we can financially support the community.
Very good, thank you. Tell us, give us a little bit more on Seacoast Mental Health. What's the breakdown of your demographic? You mentioned kids and you mentioned families and adults. What's the percentage of kids versus adults and whatnot that you see?
The percentage gets difficult because we end up, the way that we look at it is we sort of look at the full family. Our adult services department is a much larger department because it covers everything from basically 18 years old all the way through. Seacoast manages the state's REAP program, which is the Elderly Services and Immediate Case Management program. And so we really have adults from 18 all the way until, end of life, essentially. And we have both, we deal with essentially mental illness, what we call the walking well, which are people who everybody is sort of on a continuum of mental health needs over time. And when somebody dips and needs those needs, we service them. And then we also have substance use disorder programs. So I would say it's probably maybe a 60-40 split, but we end up doing so much work on the youth side with the entire family that, when you start looking at sort of what are kids versus what are the adults, it can start to bleed together. Something that we also service at Seacoast is we help run one of the state, for people going through divorces. We also do sort of the parent impact classes. And so we offer those pretty much, I think it's about every other week out of the center.
Very good. Sorry, I was muted there for a second. One last question before we jump over to Christine. Have you seen an increase in demand for your services over the last 2 months that we've been dealing with this?
It's been really interesting. The short answer is yes, but not until recently. When everything started to hit in the beginning of March, our services have not changed. We are offering the exact same services that we always have. We're offering them slightly differently because it's now in a full telehealth model, except for our medication injectables. We are still doing our medication on site for people. Our nursing staff has never left, and our emergency services staff has never left the facilities and the emergency department. And things had stabilized. We saw emergency room admissions decrease. We were not taking any new admissions. Now I would say that we're doing about 5 to 6 intakes that are new every single day. So it's almost as if people have adapted to what the new normal is for the services. And we're seeing some of the wear on people really start to hit as, you know, what are we into week 10 now locally? And we're really seeing that start to impact people. And so we are seeing the demand start to increase.
I know that was a trend that the hospitals were seeing across the board too. I know that you know, people were not going to the hospital for fear of contracting COVID-19, so people were staying home even when they had things as serious as strokes and heart attacks. That they just weren't seeking medical services. So it's interesting to see that that has started to rebound a little bit. Excellent. So let's transition over to Christine.
Hi.
There you are.
Hi,
Hello. Tell us a little bit about what you do at the city schools and what you're doing today in the city schools, because it's probably changed a bit.
Yes. Well, thanks for inviting me. I guess the first thing I want to make sure people understand is that I'm not a mental health professional. I actually work in the area of more public health and more broad-based holistic health, similar to what Rebekah spoke of. So my job with the school district is to be the K-12 wellness coordinator. And that's a very broad description of a job, but I do everything from creating the infrastructure that supports the school board and the school district's goal around student well-being, recognizing that the need for students to be healthy and families to be healthy is a key component of closing that gap of inequity and getting kids through in a better way and graduating and moving on to something substantial as college or career. I work with elementary right now. I've been working with Franklin Elementary School in Franklin, and we've been doing some training about implementing the multi-tiered system of support, which is an evidence-based strategy on identifying interventions that could be adapted to the whole school around creating a healthy social emotional environment, and then progressing up the tiers depending on what students' needs might be. So that's one example of ways that we can implement this infrastructure and then be able to gather data and figure out what's working, what's not working, what more do families need. So that's like one initiative that that I've been working on. I also last year implemented the School Health Index, which is a comprehensive assessment at the middle school. So we went through 11 different modules assessing the overall well-being of the middle school, everything from what do we have in need around health services, what do we have in need around mental health, is the physical building everything that the middle school needs it to be, how is the employee wellness and their level of well-being. So it's very comprehensive, and again, it gives us the infrastructure to identify areas of need so then we can set goals and objectives to meet those needs and move the pendulum along in creating a more well community for students and our staff to live and work in. Since pandemic hit, the other role I have is I am chair of the nurses in the public schools. So I spent a lot of time working with them virtually in just addressing some of the physical needs of students and trying to figure out where we, right now we're at the point of talking about, okay, when we return, what's our plan going to be? So our focus, I think, for the rest of the time that we're together is going to be on that. But I've also been working with a group of other professionals where we've been developing a wellness website. And so trying to create a place that we can put resources for families and students. And so like when I come across an article that says, how do you help your teenager adjust to this having to stay in and sequestering and isolation. So just trying to provide the resources that I think families need in order to kind of get through this phase of existence that we're all in.
That was a lot going on there.
Yeah.
So that's pretty broad in what you talked about, and there's lots of different questions. I'm curious, just as a place to start, nationwide and locally, what are we seeing as far as the health and wellness of students? I hear the governor talk about domestic violence being on the rise and issues in the home being on the rise. Are we seeing that locally or not?
I think one of the concerns that I heard, which was a few weeks ago, was that the actual number of reports coming into social services had decreased. And there was a concern for that because a lot of times the issues that surround students around health and safety are identified in schools. And that's the starting point where an intervention might start. And since the teachers are not seeing this face-to-face, there's concern that there are things happening that we may not be aware of just because of the number of reports going down. And I think every time you put major stress into anybody's life, and this isn't just anybody's life, this is the entire world, that we have increased this mass amount of stress of unknown, you are going to see the ripple effect of impacting the well-being of everybody. So you can't separate out mental health from the rest of the physical body and the community. So I think that what we're seeing is this bubbling up, and and I think Rebekah identified it when she said, okay, people kind of come around the corner and accepting that, okay, this is where we've been, but my stress level, I'm like ready to lose it. Like I can't get away from my kids. I can't, I'm worried about I've got laid off. I'm worried about whether or not I'm going to get my job back. I mean, there's just so much to it that it's absolutely, pandemic, I think, equals an emergency around mental health for sure.
And I'm curious, you mentioned something in your opening remarks there about employee wellness. And that was something interesting. And it just, in my house this morning, my daughter was having a face-to-face video chat with her teacher and a small group of students. And she's a third grader, and she said something to her teacher that the next time she sees her, she'll be a fourth grader. And her teacher started tearing up and got very sad about that. And I know there's a lot of love between the students and the teachers, and how are the teachers handling it, and how do you kind of keep tabs on their mental health?
That's actually a really great point. I think if anything good that's come out of all of this, and there will be some good out of it, it is a great appreciation for what teachers do. And I've heard that over and over and over again. If kind of joking on social media, if you take my kid back, I'll pay you more money. So this whole idea of how hard it is to be a teacher. And so that level of appreciation, I think, has helped the teachers when they hear things like that. I know the middle schools teachers have got a lot of positive comments from parents back, and Phil has shared those out to the teachers and said, the parents think you're doing a really good job. That being said, this is not the type of environment that teachers meant to get into. I mean, good teachers are good teachers because of the relationships that they have with their students and being able to see them every day and interact with them every day. So that's a huge loss for teachers. So they had to kind of literally on the fly say, okay, I got to figure out how I'm going to teach this remotely, and because we're starting in 2 days, and I'm also, there's no time to grieve, the kids in front of you. I mean, I remember when we left, we were thinking, okay, we're going to be out for 2 weeks, and my public health background was saying to myself, it's going to be more than 2 weeks. But so it was just so rushed and so intense and so urgent that creates a level of grief that now that it's kind of settling down and the teachers realize, okay, we got 3 more weeks of classes, but we don't know what the fall is going to look like. I think that's creating another stress. So it's not this relief, okay, we've done this now and we're going to get to go back to quote normal in the fall. The reality is we don't know what the fall is going to look like yet. And that again creates a different type of anxiety. And I think, as we know, employee wellness, if employees are not well, then they cannot do their job. And so there is an innate value in ensuring that we do what we need to do to keep our staff healthy. And that will be one of the focal points that I'll be looking at as we create this back to school plan. How do we support the teachers and the staff in the ways that they need to be supported? And we'll have to figure out what that looks like.
Yeah, as a son of a lifelong educator, I've always had a strong appreciation for the role that teachers and the amount of time that teachers put in, and the amount of love that teachers put into the daily, day-to-day of the students. And it's great to see that, everyone, and there's very funny videos out there, people saying, I'm going to jump on the PTA, and I'm going to do the bake sales, and you want it, you get it, all that sort of stuff going on. So that is, I definitely agree with you that is a positive outcome of this. So let's jump back to Rebekah here. Let's give you a break, Christine, for a second. So, Rebekah, what are your thoughts as you listen to Christine talk? I know you guys kind of work closely together. As what do you see as the next sort of evolution of this, and where do you think where this will go throughout the summer?
Well, we're just starting right now. Internally at Seacoast, we're starting to have the discussions of the what next, and it sort of maps to what we're seeing in our community of, there was this rush into home, and sort of people just sort of, no matter what they needed, they just sort of dealt with the immediacy. We figured out, what do we do to get people their medication, and what do we do we continue to be able to reach out to our homeless population? Because we have a large number of clients that are experiencing either situational or chronic homelessness. There were sort of these immediate things. And then we're in this pattern now. And so we're starting the discussions of, what do we start to phase back into the office? How do we do that? What does that mean? And when we start these discussions in our operations group, it's pages and pages and pages of tiny details that we have to start fleshing out. And that in and of itself gets very overwhelming. So we've been doing a large focus for ourselves on our staff. So I was listening to what Christine said, and it really made me think that, the comparison between therapists and teachers is very, very close. Our therapists were thrilled to be able to move out into their homes and continue to provide services, but they're really starting to feel not seeing their clients, and particularly our youth clients. Our outreach staff desperately wants to get eyes on actual bodies and families and see them in their yards at a safe social distance, because we're really not sure. Like, we think everything has stabilized and that people are doing relatively okay, but we really feel that we need to get back to some semblance of normalcy for whatever that next phase is. And I don't know that we know that. The uncertainty, I think, of this entire situation is what I've been feeling personally, and what we as an organization see in our clients and in the communities. That's the biggest impact on people. There's no end in sight. We don't know what an end would be. So it's not even that we can visualize an end and say, we just don't know when it is. We don't even know what it looks like. And that kind of uncertainty brings an automatic fear to people. And that fear is, I think, all the reactions you see out in society and in our community are all fear-based reactions. And we see that from a staff perspective. We see it from a client perspective. We see it from just the ability of having to fight for the last 10 weeks for the appropriate amount of PPE that we need. We as an organization aren't sure, we think that telehealth and the reimbursements that we've received, we will be able to continue with. And it's been a game changer for us. This is, in the therapy world, the shift that's happened over 10 weeks is something that never would have happened without the pandemic, and that's happening in all sorts of different types of industries. Well, for us, it is it unblocks some incredibly difficult barriers for some people to get care. So it's been really great in some ways. We don't know if it's going to continue. So there's a whole other level of uncertainty for us, is, not having this brings back other issues. So I guess the real answer to your question is I don't know where this is going to go, but that unknown is exactly where we're trying to focus our time, both from a planning perspective and a care perspective for our clients. Because no matter what, I mean, we moved to my CEO's credit, we were out of the office before the state of emergency was issued, which enabled us to get reimbursed for telehealth. Jay moved us out the week of was it Thursday, the 13th, my kids went home. That Monday, we were out. And it took another week for us to actually get the reimbursement okay.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think another positive outcome of this, or at least an evolution that will stick around, is the telehealth model. I think a lot of people were very hesitant to that. They wanted to go see their doctor and they wanted to see their therapist and they wanted to go there or felt that's what they had to do. And I think a lot of people are saying, you know what, I don't need to go for this. I can pretty easily, do a little FaceTime or whatever it is and get this, looked at or taken care of. And so I think that will be something that sticks.
It's been, from a therapy perspective, if you think about it, you think about where a human being is the most comfortable sharing something which maybe is extremely difficult for them. You have a client with trauma, or if you have a child who it doesn't communicate well and maybe has issues with sort of close proximity to another human being, or there's a whole host of issues. We have people who they're the most comfortable when they can smoke. Well, they can't smoke in our office. They can smoke in their house. And so we have clients who have told us, I'm so much more comfortable opening up to you, my therapist, when I can have a cigarette in hand and my dog at my feet. And we have particularly people struggling from the disease of addiction who either don't have a car or don't have a license or whatever. Well, that barrier of transportation is gone. Yeah. Because we can now treat them where they are. So there's all these pieces where it doesn't work for every single piece of care. And like I was saying, our therapists really want to get their eyes on some people. And that's, as we start to analyze staging into whatever this next phase is, those are the clients that we're looking at first, and it's mostly our kids. Who can we get out and see? Because those are the clients, while we're all dealing with the impact of isolation, the children are the ones that are feeling it the most from our perspective.
Has there been any projection work done on, I would assume that as this continues on, and sadly, I think it's in a situation where more and more people will, be unemployed for a while, and homelessness may rise, and those situations may increase. Has there been any nationwide projections or anything like that about the need for additional mental health services and mental health providers and that?
I'll be honest, I haven't myself seen concrete data numbers. The general consensus is absolutely that, we were already in sort of a mental health crisis situation. And depending on your state and on your area, the access to care and the access to particularly hospitalization in our state is an issue. And also on the substance use disorder side, that there's inpatient care is a major issue in a lot of states, including our own. Hands down, that is increasing. I know, for example, one of the first places that the opioid disorder took off in Appalachia, they're seeing a rapid uptick in relapses. So it's coming, and most of the reading that I've done maps these kinds of, if you can compare this new pandemic to anything, they're mapping it to things like 9/11, the Great Depression, the economic crash in 2008. They're sort of trying to take anything which had a massive societal impact. And for us, we're mostly looking at the United States. And what happened after that. And it's about a 9 to 18 month window of mental health demand, where it starts to it's not right away, and where it just starts to build and build. And all of a sudden, there's the people that you sort of typically identify. Well, these people will have issues and these people will have issues. And then in this case, I don't know one person. Right now, I really don't know one person who at some point hasn't just broken down and sobbed, or is legitimately having waves of unbelievable stress. And sometimes they don't even know how to identify it. And that's the piece that comes later, is when you can identify what it is, you deal with it right away. And most of us are conditioned to say, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. I have all these big pieces to juggle. You know, I have my life here, but so I'll deal with this part of my life over here later. And that's gone. I mean, I don't know about anyone else sitting on this call, but 9/10 of my life is sitting within my home right now. And so I can't get away from that. And they can't get away from the rest of us. And that's the stuff that we predict is going to start to crash.
So what are some of those warning signs? What should people be concerned about when they're talking to their friends or family or looking at their spouse and their home life? What are those warning signs people should, say, hey, maybe we probably need to call someone or talk to your PCP or whatever it is?
So part of the problem with that is that the typical signs are things that people are now doing just out of necessity. So typically for kids, we would say, and Christine, I would look to speak more specifically to this, but it's, if somebody was social, are they isolating? Is there some sort of vast behavioral change? Is there, upticks in anger or downturns of silence and depression? Are eating habits shifting? Is somebody who's always been active now completely sedentary? And those are all still valid, but those are things that people are doing anyway. I think it's fair to say if my kids are not in a swing of depression right now, but they're sure as heck watching way more Netflix than they ever in their bedrooms than they ever have before. And what they're doing now, I would normally earmark as a problem. But, I think in general, signs of a crisis really are if somebody's moods are really swaying dramatically, if somebody who typically does share is really just, will not answer, will not engage in anything and is incredibly disconnected. And the number one thing that a lot of us say is your gut. If you know somebody and they're acting different, then that's an automatic signal for you and to ask. This is a time for people to, I think, to overly communicate, overly reach out to your neighbors, overly reach out to your loved one, and acknowledge it's fine. It is totally okay to not be okay right now. I mean, it always is, but especially right now. What can I do for you?
Sure. I think that brings a good point. And maybe Christine, we'll switch to you and let you kind of chime in on that same topic.
Well, I think, I was thinking earlier when I was just thinking about coming to this discussion, that the last time I was in a meeting with representatives from the community of Portsmouth, we were literally discussing planning for the digital fast. And that digital fast was set to happen this weekend. So if you just think about, okay, we're trying this community initiative that was designed to help people identify, get away from your phones, get away from your computers, get more engaged in the community, get outside, do things that are fun. And literally, we're now at the exact opposite, where we have to be connected to technology or we're literally disconnected from life. So one term that I came across recently, actually early this morning, that I thought was really interesting, and it was the term called ambiguous loss. And it was defined by a researcher named Pauline Boss, and it's identified as a loss that occurs without closure or clear understanding. And so I would encourage people to take that definition and really own it, to say that we are all experiencing loss, and it's loss to different degrees because we also have other losses that normally would happen. So for example, we had to put our family dog down last week in the middle of all of this. And so I had to say to my son today, remember, we lost a family member last week. So we really need to give ourselves some space and let ourselves just feel what we're feeling. And I think if there's anything that could be good that families and employers at home could do is help their kids and spouses recognize that we are actually building resiliency right now. And resiliency has been something that has been missing from, especially I knew from working in higher ed as students, as the 9/11 babies started to come up through college, and just the level of stress and the level of anxiety and the truly lack of having tools in their toolbox to deal with it became really an astronomical problem, and trying to figure out how to deal with that in the midst of higher education. So I think helping, for everyone to just step back take a breath and say, you know what, we're doing the best we can, and we're actually doing a pretty good job. And if there's any time to coin on to one day at a time from the addiction side of it, is today. That we have to take one day at a time and really appreciate what we're doing well, and give ourselves space to say, you know what, I'm really angry, or I'm really depressed, or I'm really sad, or whatever it is that you're feeling. And then help each other say, so what can you do about that? So, one of the conversations I had with my son was, okay, so let's pick some of the things that are stressing you out, and pick one that we can actually do something to address that. And it had to do with him returning to work. So we kind of strategized that and walked through it. And so the more you can do that, even with your kids at home and their homework, and trying to, feeling lost because they haven't seen their teacher, and they need to ask a question, but the teacher's not going to be there for a couple of hours. All of that, getting them through that, is going to bode well for them in their adult life, that they're actually going to be well prepared to deal with transition and change. And as long as we can continue to do that, acknowledging the loss and saying, yep, I don't know what the summer's going to look like. I don't know if you're going to be able to go to camp. But what we can do is, I think we're going to be able to go to the beach and at least go in the water and come back out. That seems to be where we're heading. Like, the beaches might be open, but you can't sit on the beach. So trying to just identify, okay, this is going to be our solution to, and I think families have done a great job of that so far, at least from what I'm seeing, of just getting outside and hiking, more pictures, on social media, just saying we're spending time together, we're appreciating time together, having family meals, being able to cook, all of those things, and just trying to remind yourself about what are the positive things, because we need to hold on to those things in order to maintain some level of mental comfort or mental stability.
Yeah, actually, we made our children the other day sit down and physically write out a list of the positives of this whole situation. Mm-hmm. That was something that, that we were just having a bad day here at the house. People were a little cranky and
mm-hmm.
A little cranky and just, kind of over it. And we said, you know what, there's some bad things here for sure, but there's a lot of good things, and let's sit down and make that list. And I think that's
a great.
Yeah.
That helped for a couple hours.
I think, one of the things, taking what Christine's saying, is it's really important, I think, as adults and as employees and as employers, we forget that what's good for our kids is good for us. So from an employer perspective, one of the things as a leadership team at Seacoast that we've been doing is, we're blessed to have a CEO that is very communicative, but we've really put an emphasis on that every day since the first day we've all been at home, every single day an email from her that we've put content into goes out to our staff, and they know what's going on. Nothing is being done that they're not aware of. We're asking them input for what they're, so with this just early discussion of how do we start to plan to bring services back out into the community. The first thing we did before we talked about it was we asked what their fears, their anxieties, and their blockers are, because we know we have to look at this from a programmatic standpoint, from a services standpoint, and from an individual staff standpoint, because there isn't camp. Kids, they're home. They're really home. They don't even have school that we can obsess over. So we took all of that, and then every day we're recognizing that. And sometimes I think as adults, and we see this with our clients too, is recognizing just because you're adult doesn't mean that you have it together or you need to. So you also need to do what you're trying to do for your children. And we've been trying that in our house. We have had our ups and downs. It's a lot of this with 2 teenage boys and 2 adults. And I try and bring home what we're doing in the office, which is let's overly communicate and at least acknowledge, that it's okay not to be okay. And it's also okay to feel good about something right now and not get sucked into just, this has to be horrible, because it doesn't actually you don't have to feel guilty if there's a piece of it that actually feels okay.
Very, very good advice. So we are at 1:45. We have about 15 minutes left, and we have 5 minutes before the end of this. We have our feel-good moment that we like to share, and I'm very excited about this week's feel-good moment. So I'm going to briefly highlight what's going to be on this show or next week, And while I'm doing that, I would hope that everyone takes a moment to um, contribute any questions that you have for either Christine or Rebekah, so that we can get to those before we go. So next week, we are going to have a discussion on the decision to open or not open. We are going to have 2 restaurant owners and 2 retailers join us. We're trying to finalize those right now, but there will be a restaurateur and a retailer that made the decision to open, and we're going to talk to them about that decision-making process there and what led them to ultimately make that decision. And we're going to also have a retailer and a restaurateur who made a decision not to open. And we're going to have a similar conversation with them about, what was it that led them to make that decision. And for some of them, it's very cut and dry. They just couldn't do it. Physically, didn't have the space, whatever that is. But we'll dive into that decision-making process next Friday. So stay tuned. We'll hopefully have those guests finalized early next week and get that out during the week next week. But it should be a very interesting and timely conversation, as a lot of restaurants in the city is working very hard to navigate these waters that we're all getting into. So I try to say that without too many cliches, because there's cliches everywhere. So with that, I don't see too many questions coming in. So I think what we'll do is we'll just have okay, we did have one question just pop up, thank goodness. Ask us, share one piece of advice that you would give an employer regarding the mental health of their employees. So maybe we'll start with Christine, and then we'll go to Rebekah on that one.
One piece of advice. I think the one piece of advice I would give employers is to try as much as possible, and I know there's limits with running a business and trying to figure out all this other stuff, but I am a big fan of collaborative problem solving. So with your employees, I think the more that you can empower them to help you resolve issues around work, such as opening and schedules and things like that, that they become a part of the solution, is really, really empowering. It's an empowering strategy with kids. And it's anytime somebody feels validated enough to say, you're an important part of this, help me figure out what the best strategy might be. And you might be surprised what they come up with and what they think about. People, when given the opportunity, can really think outside the box. And I was thinking about that video telehealth component and just how fascinating that piece is. And Rebekah was right, taking away those obstacles that so many people couldn't get care because of things that they had no control over. So I would say, think about collaborative problem solving and try to use it as one of your tools in your reestablishing a routine within your business.
Oh, my turn.
Yeah.
So I think it's very similar to what Christine said. This is a very individualized situation, and an employer can't make vast, there needs to be some baseline decision making. But for example, as an agency, as a nonprofit agency, as one that has been fairly traditional in our benefits to employees, we have policies that we have to relax now. There are, as one of the things as we look into reentry is, it was one thing just to move out. We all moved out, and actually the transition out for us was far less anxiety producing from a staff perspective as the even slowly transition back in. And some of that is because everybody is in a different place. We're in a different place emotionally. We have different kid situations, aging parent. Some people have, compromised health situations, or their spouse does. Maybe their spouse, something to recognize is if their spouse loses their job, that impacts your employee who still has their job. So from an advice perspective, I think it's really acknowledging the fact that maybe some of the way that you have managed business doesn't need to go away, but should be assessed and looked at and put in priorities. What kind of policies can you relax? You know, to what degree can you loosen up a bit, even with the acknowledgement of, we're going to look at this every 3 months. You know, you don't have to, I do not vision our organization moving in and that's going to be our new normal. I don't think there's a defined new normal. I think there's a constant evolving shift to what the current normal is based upon what's going on. Because again, we don't know where this is going. None of us do. And so as an organization, your number one asset is your employees. And I think really prioritizing and looking at how can we service them the best, and to Christine's point, and maybe involve them in the process as much as possible to get the best end result for all parties is going to be the most financially beneficial for everybody.
Very, very good thoughts. So any last little bits that you want to share, either Rebekah or Christine, before we transition into sort of closing up here?
I guess one of the things that I picked up on the internet, and I'm always a big Dr. Seuss fan, and the messages that children's books come through. But I know that many students graduating often get their book, All the Places You'll Go, from Dr. Seuss. And there's a part in it that deals with this idea of destruction with suspension, like this constant waiting place. And a part of the book, that this idea that we're always waiting, says waiting for a train to go, or a bus to come, or a plane to go, or the mail to come, or the rain to go, or the phone to ring, or the snow to snow, or waiting around for a yes or no, or waiting for their hair to grow. Everyone is just waiting for the fish to bite, or waiting for wind to fly a kite, or waiting around for Friday night, or waiting perhaps for their Uncle Jake, or a pot to boil, or a bed to break, or a string of pearls, or a pair of pants, or a wig with curls, or another chance. Everyone is just waiting. I thought that was a nice way to kind of put in context where we all are right now.
Very, very nice. Thank you, Christine. Appreciate you being here and taking time, and particularly thank you for working hard to keep our students safe and well and happy. So thank you for all your work that you do. Rebekah, did you want to share any last little thoughts?
I definitely don't have anything that poetic. I think really it's just to emphasize the fact that, there's a saying out there right now that we're all in the same boat. And then some people look at it as we're really not all in the same boat. We're all in lots of different kinds of boats, and each boat is in a different place. And some boats are kind of sinking, and some boats are speeding ahead. Some boats are actually just tied to their mooring and are just sitting there, but we are all in the same ocean. And for us as an organization, the main message that we have for any community member, whether it's an employer or a client or a prospective client or anybody, is that we service this whole area. We're not the only organization. If somebody doesn't live in our area, our catchment area, then we would refer them immediately to somewhere else. But the bottom line is that if somebody is not feeling right, and everyone knows what their right is. And if someone isn't feeling right, there is absolutely no shame. There's no stigma to it. If there was ever a time, there was even less time there should be a stigma, it's now, is to pick up the phone and call our phone numbers, because they're 24/7. You don't have to walk into an emergency room to be seen in a crisis, or if you're not even sure if it's a crisis. And so we're just really wanting to emphasize to everybody that for whether it's for you, for your child, for your friend, for your aging parent, whoever it is, pick up the phone and call our phone numbers. So right at the top of our website, they're right on our social media pages. We're on all the channels, and somebody will be there to answer your questions. And the worst they can say to you is, actually, you're fine. So, it's okay. And we'd really rather people do that than not.
Well, thank you, Rebekah, and thank you. Jen wants everyone to know that you're even on Twitter. Jen's the Twitter queen. She loves the Twitter, and wants everyone to know that. But thank you, and to all your colleagues for all that they're doing in this time, and for adjusting how they administer their services and keeping all their clients in the right place. So thank you very much for being here and for doing all that. So with that, we are going to transition to the closing notes. These are not nearly as long as the opening notes Valerie gave me. So we will transition to that. A couple of things just to remember. Our website is full of lots of great information, portsmouthcollaborative.org/COVID-19. Jen is cranking out all sorts of good social media content for you, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. So thank you, Jen, for being here today and for doing all that. And as things start to reopen, retail and restaurants, we'll be keeping those lists up to date. If you haven't joined our Seacoast Strong Business Forum on Facebook, it's a group that we and other chambers in the Seacoast started. Feel free to jump in there. There's lots of good ideas and information being shared there regularly. And if you have not signed up yet for the daily email from the city manager's office, our friend Stephanie Secor puts that together for everybody. Go ahead and get that done. You can do that by going to the city's webpage. So let us know if you have an idea for a future episode of Chamber Chat Live. Feel free to email us and let us know a speaker that you'd like to hear from. As things continue on, we are going to keep this going as long as we can and as long as we need to. So next week, I mentioned, we'll have some retailers and some restaurateurs joining us that have made a decision to open or not and talk through that decision-making process. Valerie did want me to remind you that it does take 11 hugs a day. Those can be virtual hugs to thrive. And so feel free to share those words of affirmation and real hugs if you can with those that are important to you. So thank you all for being here. Our entertainment this week comes from our friends at PMAC, Portsmouth Music and Arts Center. I don't know if you all saw this, but last Friday, the teaching staff at PMAC put together a little jazz ensemble and roamed the streets of Portsmouth and even ventured down to our friends in Rye and performed little impromptu street concerts that they then shared on their social media for everyone else too. So that was a great little act of kindness and just a little bit of spontaneity from the folks at PMAC, and want to thank Russ Grazier and his team over there. So we are going to share one of those videos momentarily. It is about 7 minutes long, so if you can hang out and listen to it, please do. If you need to sign off and move on to something else in your day, feel free to do that as well. So here it comes. Maybe.
you.